It's time for the Writer's Block, our weekly look at all things sports. I'm Jenny Carlson here in the studios of the Oklahoman, joined by Cedric Golden in the studios of the Austin American-Statesman. Hello, friend.
What's up, J. Carr?
Whole lot of NBA, some U.S. Open, some Women's World Cup. We'll talk about all of that and then some probably during this week's Writer's Block. But let's start with the NBA. And we got to start with Kevin Durant, Cedric, because he comes back in Game 5, that critical must-win game for the Warriors in Toronto. After that injury, a calf injury, was not said to be an Achilles, but then he tears his Achilles, and all about the finals has become all about Kevin Durant and this injury. What do you make of him coming back? Do you think he rushed it? Do you think he felt like he had to rush it? What do you get in his mind a little bit? You knew him from his Texas days. What do you think happened here?
Well, deep down, I know that Kevin Durant's a tough guy, and the last thing he wanted was to leave Golden State, with them saying he already had a foot out the door. So what he did is he was out for a month. So he came back, he delivered 11 points in the first quarter, three three-pointers, and looked like the old KD, and then he tore his Achilles. I always thought it was an Achilles injury when he got hurt in the previous series instead of a calf, because I've seen people get hurt and he grabbed at the same spot that an Achilles injury would be. But what it did is it basically showed how much he loves Golden State, or how much he loves his reputation, because he didn't want to be the guy that bailed on his teammates. I'm not sure I buy the crocodile tears from Bob Myers, the president of basketball ops. That was kind of painful to watch. But what it really did to me is it showed how much these guys respect Kevin Durant, how much he respects them. You never see, when a guy gets hurt really bad, there's always the 11th and 12th man on the bench, always are the guys taking him back to the back. But you saw Andre Iguodala, an NBA Finals MVP, and Steph Curry, a league MVP, tending to their teammate. And to me, that spoke volumes. If anything, Jen, it may increase the chances of Kevin Durant returning to Golden State.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. You know, you mentioned those guys taking him back to the back, and I said out loud as I watched and realized who was with him, I said, don't they have a game to play in? Aren't they needed out on the floor? But there they were in the back hallway with Durant. You know, I don't know, said this whole injury brings up the issue of how long Durant will be rehabbing, when he'll be available. I mean, clearly, if you're a team that wants Kevin Durant, you go after him even if he's going to be sidelined with this thing for, you know, even this whole next season. You don't know when he might be back. But it does bring up the question of how does this affect free agency? And we'll get to the Raptors fans' reaction here in just a second, but let's talk about free agency, because even as this finals is going on, Cedric, I mean, a chance for either the Warriors to have this 3-1 comeback for the ages without Durant, or Toronto to win a first championship for them, for Canada, for a non-U.S. NBA team. All of this is going on, and yet we're all talking about Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving and who the Lakers are throwing out on the draft block potentially. Is that good for the NBA? I mean, it is what it is. We're talking about it. Is that a good thing that the finals may have been overshadowed a bit by all this free agency stuff?
I think so. I think the whole fan base, all fan bases of especially the bad teams like the Lakers, and are buzzing over the prospects of getting back into the tournament. You're talking about Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard. The greatest free agent class maybe of our lifetime is this summer, and the finals have been okay, but the playoffs overall were kind of blah anyway, Jen. So maybe 1 or 2 seventh games in all of the playoffs. So I think any good buzz about free agency, about the excitement that these other teams have in hopes of landing one of those big fish is beneficial to the league. It kind of overshadows what might end up being a really bad NBA Finals if the Toronto Raptors close out Golden State. 4-2 series doesn't really get anybody excited. They'd love for it to go 7 games and kind of salvage what's been kind of a hard luck series for the Warriors, who've been battling some injuries.
Yeah, for sure. I think everybody in Toronto would be okay if it went 4-2 and that was it. I think they'd be pretty excited by it. You know, obviously, everybody's so pumped for Game 5, and then it didn't go the way Toronto had expected, and frankly seen it going there in the fourth quarter. A heck of a comeback by the Warriors at a time when they're without Durant, obviously. Also, I mean, their whole roster has really been affected by injury, it seems like, at some point. So just to still be in this thing, I know they've got so many all-stars, you know, you almost don't feel bad that they're down to 2 or 3. But at the same time, they are battling a team that is playing really well. Kawhi Leonard obviously playing at a high level, Kyle Lowry, Serge Ibaka, Siakam. I mean, on and on down the list. They've got some really good guys over on that Raptors side. But said before we stop talking about all things NBA finals, at least, we got to talk about the Raptors fans' reaction to Kevin Durant's injury. I've seen a lot of scuttlebutt about this. I'm sure you have too. Some people saying that, you know, not everybody in the arena can see Kevin Durant on the floor, what he's doing. You know, there was a steal, there was a play. Was the reaction to that? Was the reaction to him being hurt? I think pretty clearly some people were reacting to him being hurt. But so much talk about this, and you know, it brings up the question, do other fan bases do this? I think the answer is probably yes from time to time. But it did sort of sully what's been a pretty feel-good story about all these Canadians and their friendliness and just how great they've been during these finals. It sullied that at the very least.
You know, it's been on both sides. People are mad at the photographs of guys pointing at Durant and clapping while he's grabbing the back of his heel. And Canada's known as a friendly country, and so. But here's the thing that everybody must know, Jennifer. Every fan base has bad, classless fans. They're all over the place. A lot of them have money on the game. So when they see Kevin Durant go down, that increases their chances of cashing in their bet and winning some money. They're also so into trying to get a championship, a lot of them, of the first non-American NBA title, that people are letting their emotions flow. And it was unfortunate. The nice thing that I liked about it, Jen, is you saw Serge Ibaka and Kyle Lowry trying to tell the fans, no, don't clap because Kevin Durant is hurt. Yeah. Those guys understood that could be me grabbing my Achilles. And the news has come out today on NBC Sports that Kevin Durant's probably going to miss the entire 2020 season. So we're talking about livelihoods here. We're talking about a guy's passion. And I remember when I was real little, Jen, I was watching a football game and I was pulling against a team and the other team's player got hurt and I started clapping. My dad ripped me a new one. Don't you ever clap when somebody gets hurt. My dad was in the military, so he didn't play that. Yeah. He'd seen some things that we haven't seen, Jen.
Yeah.
And so he goes, don't you ever clap when somebody gets hurt, because that could be you. That could be your teammate. How would you feel then?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, these are human beings. I know they make a lot of money. I know you want your team to win, but there's no place in any sport. I'm talking to you too, Raider Nation. No place in any sport to cheer when someone gets hurt.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You know, it was unfortunate, and I think there probably were some people that weren't aware of what happened. You know, when a player goes down, you know, ends up on the floor, a lot of times it's, you know, you feel like, hey, you know, the guy's getting a little bit made a fool of, maybe that sort of thing is happening. But if you didn't see the whole thing, if you saw it all, you realized, okay, this guy's hurt. He's going down because he hurt himself. But I don't give a pass to the Raptors fans, because I definitely think there were too many people who were reacting to the injury. But I do think there had to be some. You know, you can't see everything from every vantage point in the arena, and there was something else happening on the court at the same time. So, you know, I don't give them a full pass, but I do think it's worth, you know, remembering that there was some other stuff happening out there. Maybe not pass, you know, total judgment on all of Canada about their bad behavior. I'm not sure all of Canada deserves that. So, all right, let's move on to segment 2. Let's talk by the numbers. And Cedric, yours is a big one. Well, actually, it's not in the millions, but it's big for what it is, 13. The number of goals the U.S. women's soccer team scored in their World Cup opener. And Cedric, that number and some of the fallout from all that has become very controversial. People saying that, you know, the U.S. shouldn't have scored that many. They shouldn't have celebrated when they scored towards the end. Is any of this warranted? Any of the talk about, you know, the U.S. going over the top in this game, is any of that right?
I don't think so, and I'm going to tell you why. I don't know a whole lot about it, Jen, but I know that there's such a thing as point differential when you're deciding who advances out of their pot or whatever, and so you can't have enough goals. No one saw 13-0 coming over Thailand, but I will say this: Thailand, get your soccer game right. You don't need to be losing 13-0. You're sending a team to the World Cup, not ripping into you, Thailand, but get your game right. When you're playing against a big dog, things like that can happen. The one problem I had with it, Jen, is the celebration after the game. They were acting like they just won the World Cup. You won 13-0 in a laugher. Show a little bit of restraint. Think about those people that you just crushed. Sports is sports, and the best teams are going to usually win. And I don't mind handing it to an opponent if I can do that, because it makes for a fun day for me. But be a little classier. I know Julie Foudy, who's an Olympic legend in our country, now working for ESPN, she was a little put off by the post-game celebration. She was like, hey, let's temper that a little bit. You won 13-0, and you kind of knew you were going to win like 6 minutes into the game when you're up 5 goals. So let's just think about those other people you have that you just beat down on the other side. Let's be a little bit more sporting about it. Not a problem with the result. I do have a problem with the celebration.
Yeah, it's hard to fault a team in the opening game. If this was their third group stage game and they already knew how the goal differential part of the equation had played out with other teams, then maybe there's a point where you pull off. But, you know, the opener, you have no idea how other teams within your group are going to fare against Thailand. I mean, if you get into a situation where at the end of group play, you're tied with somebody and you said after 4 or 5 goals, we're going to lay back, and some other team beats them by 6 or 7, then there you are thinking, well, what did we stop scoring for? We needed to continue to add to the goal differential in that opening game. So I think the timing of it all, I understand the number of goals. And you know what? I think a lot of this is, you know, we want you know, women to play, to look right, to act right, you know, all of these things. Maybe every moment of that match was not exactly how you'd want it to be if you were going to script it, but you know, the U.S. best soccer team in this tournament, and they came out and they made a statement to everybody. They said, hey, this is how good we are. You got to come and get us. So I think that is a pretty strong statement that they made. Here in a few, it won't be long before we forget about all the celebration stuff, and we're just talking about how great a team this is, because I think that's something else that game showed, is that, you know, this is the World Cup. We're not talking about a friendly. We're not talking about a warm-up match. This is best players on best players, and that's the result the U.S. got. So absolutely. A very, very good team. I'm not sure why they don't get like twice as much as the men's players in the U.S. Soccer team realm. I mean, that's an issue for another day, Cedric, but those gals are impressive and deserve to be compensated for the way that they play and the manner that they uphold themselves. Let's do another number, Cedric, before we move on. My number's smaller. It's 1. That's how many Stanley Cups the St. Louis Blues now have to their history. 1 in a dramatic Game 7 after losing at home in Game 6. They go to Boston and they drill the Bruins, and it's the first time they've ever won in their 50-plus year history. People in St. Louis going crazy over the Blues, a team that was essentially out of it in January, now in June wins the whole thing. It's an unbelievable story. Nobody saw this coming out of the Blues, and there's just so much about the Stanley Cup Finals, this story. I mean, start with the fact that the Stanley Cup itself is the coolest thing out there in trophy land. I mean, it was just, I know even people that aren't hockey people were enjoying this one, Cedric. Did you watch any of it? Did you see any of the Blues win it in Game 7?
I saw a little bit of it, Jen, and I'm going to tell you why I think the Stanley Cup is maybe the coolest trophy presentation in all of sports, team sports, that is. It's because the cup is awarded to the players. You don't see an owner or a GM.
Yep.
Like you see the Rooneys and the Maras and Mr. Kraft in New England. You see those guys getting the big trophy in midfield. The Stanley Cup is awarded on the ice to the players.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the coolest traditions in all of sports. A big-time win for that city, a big-time win for that organization, a big-time win for that guy named Scott Berry, I think is his name, who held on to that ticket, Jen.
Yeah.
He bet $400 on the St. Louis Blues to win the Stanley Cup. At the time, they had the second worst record in the NHL. He bet $400 at 250 to 1 odds, $100,000 in his pocket, and the whole city is celebrating. I would only hope that we could have a similar finish in the NBA. What a great win, Jen, to go to is it still the Fleet Center or whatever it's called, to still go there, to go there and win 3 games in this series when you were left for dead in the first month of the season.
Yeah.
That's the epitome of team. That's the epitome of grit and hard work. They didn't complain. They went and they took care of business, and they're bringing a championship back home to the Gateway Arch. That's awesome.
Yeah, and their goalie, who was phenomenal, especially late in the game when Boston scored a late goal after they'd emptied their own net, so they had an extra attacker. It happens, but he was phenomenal throughout that game. The guy was the 4th string goalie when the season started. These Blues, they just have so many storylines, and maybe as much as anything, Cedric, I'm just glad that Boston didn't win something else. They've had the Patriots. The Red Sox are really good right now. The Celtics have been late in the playoffs. Just stop winning. The Bruins was a little bit of comeuppance for the city of Boston. I'm okay with that, Cedric.
I am too, and because Boston's been title town for many years. It goes all the way to boxing. Rocky Marciano and Marvin Hagler, the Bruins from way back in the day, Celtics with Bill Russell, and then the Larry Bird Celtics. It's a great sports area. Let the Midwest get a little piece of love. Shout out to the Blues. Shout out to the Midwest. Finally, Boston loses in something. It's about time.
So they're not gloating all year long. They get a little bit of break, some crow they got to eat. All right, let's move on to segment 3. This week we're calling it Coming and Going. And Cedric, we talked NBA free agency a little bit in our opening segment, but let's dive in a little bit more because we're hearing that the Lakers have put Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram out on the trading block. Kyrie has opted out, becoming a free agent, which nobody's really surprised about, but sounds like Boston is actually continuing its pursuit of Anthony Davis, even as he says he wants to go to the coast, either New York or LA. I guess Boston is also the coast, but you know what I mean. How is all this going to factor out? I mean, these are some of the most storied franchises in all of the NBA. I mean, what if Anthony Davis ends up going to Boston? Is there a chance Kyrie says, wait, never mind, I'll stay here, let's see how this goes? I mean, are all these things intertwined in your mind?
Absolutely, but I'm going to tell you, I think the marriage between Kyrie Irving and the Boston Celtics was rocky at best.
Yeah.
That was a dysfunctional locker room, and I think Kyrie wanted out of there at midseason when they were losing. So Kyrie Irving's going to end up either with the Brooklyn Nets or with the Los Angeles Lakers, I think, or with the Knicks. I think that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in Madison Square Garden would be great, but like we just said, Kevin Durant may not play next year according to NBC Sports. So that kind of throws a wrench into it. Whomever gets Kyrie Irving is going to get him with the knowledge that if they're going to land KD, they're probably going to have to give him $30 million to sit and not do anything next year. Golden State can pay him $38 million even if he doesn't play. So I think that Anthony Davis is going to end up with the Lakers. I think that they did a really bad job of selling themselves to him, just like they did with LaMarcus Aldridge when they were courting him. They didn't do a very good job. That Laker front office is in tatters. Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka aren't the most respected management duo in the league. So if I'm Anthony Davis, and I don't know if this is sexy enough for him, Jen, I would go to the Los Angeles Clippers. The Los Angeles Clippers have the best coach in the league, not named Greg Popovich, and Doc Rivers. He's a great coach. They won 45 games last season. They're only the 8th team in NBA history to win 45 games without an all-star on the roster. So that's on and popping. But if he really wants to make a splash, he should go to the Lakers. He should play with LeBron James, and they should try to coax Kyrie Irving out to the coast. And we still haven't talked about Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah.
If Kawhi Leonard and Anthony Davis go to the Lakers, look out, man. And the Lakers and the Brooklyn Nets have the kind of salary cap room that they can land 2 of those big dogs. So I'm looking at the Brooklyn Nets and the Los Angeles Lakers as the 2 biggest players. I'm not sure that the New York Knicks are going to be able to grab a couple of those marquee players just because of the record of futility that franchise has had since guys like Patrick Ewing and Pat Riley left town.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see how this all plays out, Cedric, because, well, I mean, here in Oklahoma City, and you've dealt with the Spurs over the years too, in your neck of the woods, pretty quiet. Nobody says anything in Thunderland when it comes to this sort of stuff. So even something like talk that Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram are out there available in the trade market, which, you know, pretty much everybody knows, but yet at the same time, to hear that, if you're those 2 guys, and what if one of them ends up being there again next year? It just feels like, you know, the same thing that happened when, you know, the Pelicans were trying to work a deal potentially for Anthony Davis, and basically the whole Laker locker room was essentially told in one way or another, you're expendable. We could get rid of you. You're not worth keeping. I mean, it just made everything just completely obliterated any chance at chemistry that team had. And here we are again with the, you know, somebody in the Lakers organization, you know, letting this go, getting it out there to somebody. So it's just what you said earlier, Cedric, the mess that the Lakers are absolutely on display again. And then I also think it's interesting that the Celtics have said that they're still in pursuit of Anthony Davis. They haven't sort of thrown up their hands and say there's no way to possibly land this guy. I think it all harkens back to the Thunder getting Paul George and retaining Paul George. The Raptors getting Kawhi Leonard and potentially retaining Kawhi Leonard. These teams now see, hey, if we can get these guys, maybe we can keep them. So why not? Why wouldn't Danny Ainge say, let's see if we can get Anthony Davis, convince him it's pretty cool to play in Boston, play for the Celtics, you know, play in Boston Gardens, and although it's not Boston Gardens anymore, but play with such a historic team where you're going to be beloved. Maybe they think they can keep him. I think it all sort of interrelates, Cedric, and it's wildly interesting. The guys we talked about, Ball, Ingram, Kyrie, and AD, I don't think any of them are with the teams that they're on right now. I think all of them are playing with different teams. And so what you said earlier about a huge free agent class, absolutely. I have no idea where all the pieces land, but I think a lot of guys are going to be with new teams after all this ends.
I think so too, and there might be a couple that stay. I'm just so intrigued if Kawhi Leonard wins a championship with the Toronto Raptors and leaves town. How is that going to play? No NBA Finals MVP has ever left the following year in free agency. So I think that he might be tempted, but I know from what I've read and from people I've talked to that kid wants back in LA. He's from LA. He's a West Coast guy. He's got all the money that he could ever want, and he loves what he's doing. He just wants to do it at home. I would be really intrigued if he goes and wins a championship, which I think that they will, Jen. They're going to win one of these next 2 games, and then leaves. he's going to be, I don't know that he'll be hated in Canada, but I know they won't be happy because Moses led them to the promised land and then bailed.
I don't know if they can renounce his passport so he can't get back in when his new team has to play the Raptors, but maybe that's what the Canadians would do. Speaking of Canadians not being nice, that might be the ultimate diss. But hey, let's talk about one coming and going that we know for sure here before we get out of here, and that's Lindsay Gottlieb. She coached the Cal women's basketball team for the last few years. She's headed to Cleveland to be on the Cavs staff, and Cedric, you know, Becky Hammon down there in San Antonio, we've seen how great she's been and how much Greg Popovich believes in her. She's been elevated throughout her years there. There's been talk that maybe one day she would be a head coach, but here comes Lindsay Gottlieb to join John Beilein's staff, former college coach in Beeline, another college coach, but never before has a women's college basketball coach, a female, come onto an NBA staff. Cedric, it just feels like a matter of time before there's a team out there that's hiring one of these women to be their head coach. I don't think it's going to be that long.
I don't either. And at the end of the day, Jen, ball is ball.
Exactly.
I don't care how you get dressed. I don't care what your undergarments are, be it a t-shirt or a bra. If you know ball, you know ball. And Greg Popovich jumped on this thing immediately because he understands that Becky Hammon was a basketball savant who studied the game like no one else. Lindsay Gottlieb is also a basketball student. Swin Cash just got hired as a VP of basketball operations. Was it is it New Orleans?
Yep, exactly.
One of those teams. So people are recognizing that basketball wasn't invented for men to play. Basketball was invented to be played. And it doesn't really matter what your chromosome, whatever that is, what your DNA is. You know ball, you should be paid to coach ball. Men, women, whatever, indifferent. I love the fact that women are finally getting an opportunity to show their versatility and their genius in the greatest basketball league in the world. These coaches aren't doing it to make some kind of PR statement. Popovich did not do that for political reasons. He understands that Becky Hammon can help him win basketball games. And that's what I think that the Cavs are doing with Lindsay Gottlieb. Yeah. I'm glad that it's happening. I hope it keeps happening. And just like you said, Jen, I think there's going to be in the next 10 years, there will be a female head coach in the NBA.
Yeah, I don't even think it's going to be that long. I think we're looking at maybe 5 because you look at how quickly these Spurs assistants have made their way into head coaching jobs. I think that Greg Popovich is so respected around the NBA. It just feels like, and not to say that it might not be somebody else, but I think we're talking about a head coach, that'll happen. I think a GM, which it's interesting to me to see all these other pro leagues, how they've struggled. Look at Major League Baseball. They have struggled for years to get women into front offices. It's just a handful of women that are even in assistant GM type of roles in Major League Baseball. And yet the NBA is surging with coaches, front office staff, still in the realm of first ever. But it won't be long before we're not doing many first evers anymore. I think we're going to see a lot of these barriers knocked down by the NBA, and it's so interesting to see this happening, how many teams have stepped out and hired who they think are the best people for these jobs that will make their staffs, will make their front offices the best they can be. So I applaud the Cavs. I applaud the Pelicans. You bring up Swin Cash, Cedric. I think it's great. I think it's going to be awesome to see how all of these new hires do. I mean, there's a lot of them, and it's going to be interesting to see how all the NBA shakes out. We're going to have a scorecard to keep all of this straight after free agency this next summer. But we'll do it. We'll do it here on the Writer's Block, so be sure to come back with us next week. Who knows? Maybe we'll know a bunch by then and we can talk about it then. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.